Hello, and welcome back to the Collector's Corner, the podcast that demystifies art collecting with me, Antonia Piersanti. Today, I'm very excited because I'm interviewing my first collector couple, Julia Lammer and Nico Epstein. Together, they run Arbulu Studio, working with art world stakeholders across the spectrum to help them achieve positive and lasting impact. They come from complementary sides of the art world. Julia from museums, strategic planning, and philanthropy, and Nico from art advisory, curatorial, and education through his platform, Collector Connoisseur. They started collecting individually and have carried on together, navigating rare disagreements with a few guiding principles, whilst avoiding boxing themselves into any hard and fast rules. Once again, I deviated a little bit from my original premise with Julia and Nico, since both are art world professionals. But I believe their perspective is incredibly valuable to both aspiring and seasoned collectors. We talk about developing nuanced judgment and guiding principles for collecting over time. But what I love most from our conversation is the very tangible and practical insights they share, both through examples from their personal collecting journey and also their client work over the last 15 years. I definitely recommend you check out Collector Connoisseur if you're ready to start collecting. And with the code CCorner15, listeners get 15% off until March 4th. That's CCorner15 on collectorconnoisseur.com. The link and the code are in the show notes. I'll stop here for now and let you enjoy my conversation with Julia and Nico. Julia, Nico, thank you so much for joining me today. Yeah, I'm super excited to have you both because it's the first time I'm interviewing a collector couple. So that's really cool. And so you not only collect together, you also work together. And you describe yourselves as cultural engineers, right? So the work that you do with Arbulu Studio, which is your company. And we'll talk about that definitely a little bit later. Nico, you're an art historian, art advisor. You're very much focused on education. Julia, you come more from the institutional side. So you guys really complement each other, but you're both art worlds through and through. So what I would like to do to begin with is just go back maybe to the beginning a little bit of your journeys. Was art always a part of your life growing up? Did your families collect? What kind of exposure did you have to art when you were children, if any? Yeah, I would love to start with that. Maybe Julia, you want to start?
Yeah. Well, Antonia, thanks so much for having us. This is a really fun thing to do together because we've actually never really consciously talked about our collection, but it's in a weird way, it's obviously because we're so enmeshed in it and it's so enmeshed in the art world that it's nice to step back and reflect of what we've done together and also before. I am from Vienna, and so I grew up going to many museums and being around art. I grew up with my mom and my dad. We had friends who were painters, so we had kind of contemporary work on the walls. And then with my mom and my stepfather, he actually had more of like he inherited an imperial collection. So it was a complete change of scenery in terms of how our apartment looked like. His apartment is still full of imperial regalia and
Wow.
portraits. And so
letters from Napoleon,
so there was
paintings, uniforms. It's not just art; it's an amazing fermentive stuff.
So it was, and in a weird way, I still have never really connected to it. And it's been, but this sense of collection and of care is something that I think I grew up around. And then I would say, I think being exposed in Vienna, having, the privilege to go to all these museums quite frequently, is definitely something that influenced me quite heavily as well.
Was that because your family themselves enjoyed going to museums? Was this a big part of family life?
Yeah, I think it is definitely a big part of that. I almost like when you talk to Nico, I think his is even much more so because his mom is an art historian too. So my parents are not in the creative or art world in any kind of way. But that was more from a, from enjoyment angle. And then I also have to say, I have to credit, I had an art teacher who was really great and also actually took us to the Biennale in Venice when we were 16.
Wow.
And that was a really important experience around wanting to work in that field.
Okay. So that was quite formative and a big influence on this teacher for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it was, that was a complete eye opener.
And now she also organizes the Friends of the Austrian Pavilion for the Venice Biennale.
Yeah, it's a nice turnaround. It's a kind of full circle.
Oh, girl, yeah.
I'm looking after the patrons group. It's an association of Friends of the Austrian Pavilion who support the pavilion on a year-to-year basis. Because what many people don't know is almost every national pavilion has to fundraise in addition to the budget that they're given.
Yeah.
And quite often the artist and curator couple, duo or group, have to fundraise specifically for their project. And so this one is a patrons group that is kind of independent of the artists, curators chosen. That's been a great project, and we're in the midst of organizing the trip for the May.
Yeah, I can imagine you're quite busy with that for this year's edition. Very
Yeah.
cool. So always art was always a big thing growing up. Was it similar for you then, Nico? In a different way, I'm assuming.
In a different way, I think Toronto, in terms of the cultural heritage, is very different than Vienna, in the sense that you have, with Vienna, the European, the sense of empire, the cultural heritage, the museums being in Europe, very different than Toronto. Canada is a much younger country. The art scene is also, as a result, much younger. The institutions, the museums, and so forth doesn't quite have the same sense of history. So my upbringing was different. I really became super interested in art and contemporary art at the age of 18. So I grew up in a family where my mom is renowned expert on Etienne Jules Marais and Edward Muybridge. So she's a 19th centuryist, and she's known for her work on these two photographic experimenters. So I grew up with that, and I grew up with students from her graduate program being in the mix, because she taught a graduate program that was image preservation and collections management as it related to photography. So in Toronto, across the lake, you have Rochester and the Eastman House, which is one of the most important places for photographic research. And my mom every May would take students to Paris as well to go behind the scenes and look at some of the most important photographic archives in the world. So I grew up with her, and all of this scholarly research. But the art that we had in our house, I was never super interested in. I saw these things on the wall, but it really wasn't until I went to McGill and studied art history, and then started to do internships at Guggenheim and Christie's and in different museums and galleries, that I became more and more into the industry. And basically for the past almost 20 years, since I've been 18, contemporary art and art history and the business is all that I've done, essentially. So unlike many of the other guests who in your podcast have come to collecting from outside, I'm basically always been, it's the only thing I really know professionally, right? So in terms of like my own upbringing, I benefited from my mom, but I was also incredibly lucky to have an aunt who was the curator of Leonard Lauder's collection and responsible for organizing the $1 billion collection of Cubist art that was donated to the Met a couple of years ago. And she is also a teacher at Hunter College in New York. And she was also super helpful in connecting me to people and helping me to get internships early on in my career. And so she's been very influential as well. So because I had this upbringing with my mom and my dad too. My dad was in property, but he had a music performance space, and he would do exhibitions there from about 2007. And he would also work with his friend at APAD, which is the photo fair, because one of his business partners was a photo dealer. So he wasn't necessarily, he was more into music, but he was very accepting, along with my mom, of this let's say, more eccentric career path that's non-traditional, which is being an art advisor and a teacher, which is what I am today.
Yes, almost sounds vocational for you. Like it was, there's never any question or doubt in your mind that you were going to go down that path.
Uh, I did other stuff at the beginning. I worked at Selfridges. I sold knives. But in terms of like my actual job, it's basically all I've done, yeah. For better or worse.
So never felt as an outsider then. And so your mom, sounds like your family, your mom, your aunt, your dad, those were the most influential people in your art journey, at least in the beginning. I'm sure you met more along the way. And so
Yeah.
tell me about how you started collecting. Were you already collecting individually before you met, or is that something that you started together?
I think we both had started collecting individual before. I think this is also we were both in the industry for 10 plus years before we met each other. So yeah, I I think, I've had like editions of well-known artists like a Marina Abramovich or Gilbert and George or things like or Yoko Ono, but that was kind of the entry to working and to kind of collecting a bit more seriously. And then actually what really an area that I really felt passionate about and kind of went into a bit more depth is actually Japanese woodblock prints. And so
We both share that passion.
yeah, but in a different way because your parents collected, and I think for me it's just the influence of the Japanese perspective and of those prints on modern art is something that's so influential, and it's still such a joy to look at them. So yeah, I went into collecting black and white hokusais. So there's a series that he's done a couple of volumes of, which is 100 views of Mount Fuji. So the famous ones are, with the Great Wave, that is from a book called 36 View of Mount Fuji. And this one is, he's done other books as well that are a lot more affordable, or the sheets a lot more affordable. And yeah, and this is really where I went a bit deeper.
And that was recently or fairly
That
early?
it was before I met you. Let's think
Yeah,
about
8 years ago.
8 years ago, 9 years
Okay.
ago. Yeah.
It's been a little while then. Okay.
Yeah.
And do you feel that from that point you were becoming more intentional about collecting?
100%. Yeah. I think obviously you do something here because this looks really cool and how about this? And I can afford that. But then with that, there was, yeah, exactly. There's intentionality. And I think there's also like there's something that gets sparked and that you realize it makes a lot of sense to not have one, but to maybe have 5 or perhaps 10 or, I think you can see a path into it and it gets more and more interesting the deeper you go.
Sorry, Nico, maybe what about you?
The question was about how I started collecting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So because Julia's more in the nonprofit sector and I'm a professional advisor, my collection and what I advise people to collect and that dynamic and also my parents' collection, everything is very layered. So if I were to parse through what I've been buying personally, I think
Pre-meeting.
before meeting Julia, because then obviously we buy things together and
Yeah.
that's the joy of being a collector couple, I guess. I about 10 years ago, maybe a bit longer, 2015, I was into collecting Canadian artists who are of my generation. So Paul Neal, Alexander Hardashnikov, Zoe Barks. These are now emerging mid-career artists who are still active in the industry. And sometimes it was because I had been involved in doing exhibitions or promoting their careers, or because I admired a certain gallery in New York that I deemed to be important. But my motivations for collecting then and how I did it strategically is very, very different than how I allocate resources in my own time to collecting personally 10 years later. And I think a lot of there's a lot of truisms that people say about collecting, like, oh, be curious, buy with your heart, and train your eye, and
Mhm.
all of this. But one of these sort of non sequiturs that to me is actually true is that you will make mistakes early on,
Yeah.
and there are a couple pieces that I bought 10 years ago, which I would definitely not have bought now.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily something that I regret, because I have a lot of my collection in Toronto actually living with my cousin who enjoys the work. But definitely the way that I approach collecting today, and also in line with how my own business and our business, I should say, has expanded when it comes to helping collectors, that the techniques and what I teach with Collector Connoisseur, my platform, and otherwise, all of it's been very, very different. So it's definitely a transformation. And I think it's interesting that Julia still collects for like decade plus Japanese prints, and we'll look at different markets, and we go to the same gallery in Vienna and look at prints together. My parents collect Japanese prints as well, so that's been a constant.
Yeah.
But besides that, the way I look at art and collect now versus when I began business has changed drastically.
That's interesting. I mean, unsurprising too. But then I'm curious, how do you reconcile both of your tastes and your approach? How do you do it? How do you collect together?
I think we were dating a year and a half in or so, and the first work we bought was in a fair at Paris International,
No,
no?
it wasn't Paris International.
Asia
It was
Now.
Asia Now,
Asia
I
Now
think,
in
in Paris.
Paris during the fair week. It was actually a work that we didn't know the gallery, we didn't know the artist, and we both loved it. And it was a calligraphy by an artist called Kasetsu, who does these quite performative ways of pressing paper and, like, creating
Calligraphy, yeah.
calligraphy, creating signs in a very performative way. And if I think if other people look at it, they'd be like, I would probably walk past it, but somehow we both loved it.
Mm.
And we picked it up the next day. And the gallery was also like the most non-commercial, relaxed person. I still love getting emails from them because I'm always like, I'm so happy you're still alive. but but yeah, that was the first one. And in a weird way, we we've been like quite in agreement with a lot of things we see. And I think we obviously, and it's always relatively quickly do we know whether this is a work or that we want to buy or not.
Yeah.
No? Like, I think we've bought a lot when things we've seen the first time at an opening or at a fair, or so it's not, it doesn't when it takes us a long time, it's often not working out. No?
Well, it depends on how long. Maximum a week, I would say. After that, it
But often
depends if
we've
you.
decided on the spot.
Yeah, we often, yeah. A few things that I think tie together our collection as a couple. One is that we like to support local galleries.
Yeah, that's become, I would say that's like once we moved to Lisbon, this has become definitely a kind of a focus area.
And also local artists sometimes as well. But we always buy one work from Arco Lisboa, which is
Mhm.
the significant contemporary art fair here. And I think that there are some works where they're more Julia's purchase, or there's some works that are more my purchase, but then we support each other, even though we realize that it's more the other person's choice. And so I think our collection is a reflection both of, for example, that the kaisetsu, the work which the character says heart. So that
We didn't know that before.
so
Fine.
we didn't know that. Somebody on my friend who's better in Japanese than we are mentioned that. So that was a really nice moment. It was the first work we bought as a couple,
Yeah.
first work we bought together. That was lovely as well. So I think there's some general proclivities, but we don't have like a hard and fast budget. We don't have a hard and fast geographic spread, stylistic spread. When I teach people about how to collect art, I talk about the difference between collecting horizontally or collecting vertically. Vertically being you collect one artist very in depth, one style very in depth, whereas horizontally you collect across ages, demographics, and so forth. or thematically you collect women artists or one style of work like engraving and so forth. So when I think about art collecting, I teach people these sort of axiomatic ways of looking at how they should build collections. But we, as a collecting couple, we don't necessarily adhere to those standards, but we do have at certain things about buying locally,
No,
buying at fairs.
yeah, no, I want to say, but there was a time when a lot of work was on
On paper,
paper.
yeah. We go through phases.
Okay. Yeah.
There was a lot of work that, yeah, and I think it came from, actually probably came from my love for Japanese woodblock prints. I really still love a line on paper. And then there's work, a lot of like supporting the program of local galleries who, we are friends of many of the gallerists, and it's a really beautiful thing to kind of be part of. I mean, Lisbon is not a huge city. It's obviously not something that you can say in London, but here you have quite a good overview and are very connected in the contemporary art scene. And then we still love going to fairs and finding something we've never seen.
So you buy from galleries, you buy also at fairs. It sounds like you decide very quickly if you like a work or not. You don't necessarily need to follow or know the artist beforehand.
Yeah, I think there is something about both of us being, we're having studied art history, we've been in the industry for that long, that we can kind of quite quickly make our personal judgments.
Yeah.
And at the same time,
But there's also works that we research more in depth and pursue over extended periods as well.
Yeah.
Well, there's also sometimes an artist that we're interested in, and then it takes a year or 2 or 3, and then we actually buy something, right? And you also kind of want to see, how committed they are, etc. But I think we're both quite confident in our eye.
Can you talk a little bit about that? How does the fact that you both professionally work in the art world, how does that influence the way you collect? You started hinting at it a little bit, Nico, but love for you to expand a bit more.
There's a lot of people who are in the industry who function as introducers and people who are just socializers and intermediaries, but don't actually buy art or don't actually live the collecting the collecting life in a way that they deal. So I'm kind of butchering that, but basically the way that I collect is similar to how I advise my clients. And for me, I'm looking at works of art, like 50 to 100 works of art a day via email. And because I've worked at Frieze for about 8 years, have a lot of roots at that fair. I know exactly what everyone is showing in LA in 2 weeks. I know all the prices. And I also have a handle on the high-end auctions, also a sort of slew of secondary market private deals that are being offered to me by galleries and other vendors. So I'm basically in the trenches nonstop. So I also have a newsletter which is called Art in My Inbox, and I use that as an opportunity to handwrite my thoughts on one artwork every week. So this week was Tristan Unrau, who's a Canadian artist who's being shown by Kordansky in Frieze, LA, and they're also doing a solo show of his in March. I think he's a great painter. So I practice by writing about art, which I've done for a very, very long time. And I practice when it comes to the descriptive language that I use to suggest works to a certain client. So if I'm looking at a Baselitz drawing, I know that this particular double self-portrait has a certain architectural three-dimensional feel, which is different than, let's say, a more line-based drippy drawing. I know what the works in the series are like. I know the price points. I know which galleries have them. I've seen them in person. I'm always buying or advising on the basis of stuff that I've either seen that work or seen other works that are very, very comparable in person, because that's very important. You have to see the work if you're going to make the advice, and also for the most part, if you're going to collect. I mean, there's exceptions to that. I recently bought a work which was under £5,000 and I hadn't seen it, but I know very much what it looks like. So for me, when I'm collecting, and I think we do this as a couple as well, I'm thinking about the sort of ways, the same way I'm thinking about it in the same way that I teach on Collector Connoisseur, which is the first module, which is art history. So how it corresponds to an art historical lineage. And there's lots of artists who are referencing art history. The second is the way in which it's being discovered. So if we're looking at an emerging artist, what makes it emerging? For me, emerging is a sort of not necessarily something that's delineated by age, but a state of them coming onto the market in a meaningful way and coming onto the scene in an important way. I look at how I evaluate them in terms of the artistic voice and the uniqueness, whether or not it's novelty. I have this acronym which I use, which is called NOR, so novel, original, reproducible, recognizable, and how it fits into those particular boxes. That always has an impact on how I collect.
But for that, to be able to look at those specific criteria, you need to have seen a lot, right? And you need to know art history also to, I think, a good degree to be able to judge like how novel, how different, how unique a visual style is.
Yeah, and again, like I teach people through Collector Connoisseur how to do that, but also people hire me because they don't necessarily have the time to go through those judgment gateways in order to make educated decisions. So that's why I love to help people as well. The other modules or sort of criteria that I go through more loosely are the negotiation process. So the potential for discount and also then the stewardship and the legacy component of like how we're going to pass this on to Aurelia, because now eventually the collection, whatever we're doing together, will pass through our hands. And if the work has the potential for condition issues, or it's like we said, like it's on paper, we see foxing or different red flags, even if we love the work, because it potentially has it'll degrade over time. If that happens, then we'll probably pass on it because it won't be something that we have as a long-term hold.
No, that's not true. We still do.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's being in the industry, yes, to Nico's point, with these criterias, but also, for example, in 2011, I saw Maria Barrio in New York in a really, a gallery that's not very well known or kind of not in the art, in this fair circle, anything like that. And I could have picked up every work for $10,000. And the galleries, and I was at the time, I was in the time in my 20s, and thought, this is such pretty work. I absolutely love it. I remember taking the flyer and putting it on my desk because I loved the work so much. And I was like, but and it was the time of like post-internet art, everything was very, very not pretty. And this was just so pretty and beautiful and ditzy and whimsy and feminine. And I was like, there's no way this will ever go up in value or even ever be part of the art world market in any way. And $10,000 was a lot of money at the time for me. Is still always $10,000. And so I let that go. And then, 10 years, 15 years later, you see her auction results and then like 500,000 or even, I don't even know, it's even more. I don't know.
800 grand for work.
And it happened to me a few times. This one was particular because I was so sure at the time that there's no market for an art like that.
At the time.
Yeah. And because it was just so anti what was in museums. It was the kind of Josh, which, at the moment still really important artist, Josh Klein, and things like very, very kind of political post-internet art. And so I think this and a few other examples just taught me that, and I know we're the privilege to have grown up in that taste and have studied it and all of that, but in that moment, you do have to trust yourself that even though this is very anti-market, but you think this is a really good work, that it's worth going for it.
Yeah. That's interesting. So your gut was saying yes, but you
my gut was saying, this is so beautiful. This is amazing. And I was like, but there's like, this is kind of, you're throwing that money out of the window. This is just pretty on your wall.
Do you think you would have bought it if it was, say, I don't know, 5K instead of 10?
At the time, 10 was obviously still, I would have had to be like, okay, we're moving this money from somewhere else in my savings and really investing in it. I might have, if it wouldn't have been like a significant purchase for me, would have probably, yes, because I genuinely had that flyer for on my desk for a year after, and even kept it, this box of flyers, art flyers you have that you can't get rid of because they're all kind of meaningful to you.
Mm.
Yeah, so I mean, I still have that flyer. But again, I think it just shows you that, uh, art, it's not like you don't have to think of it in like years. You have to really think about these things in decades. And tastes change, and
Yeah.
meaning changes, what's important changes quite dramatically, especially if you think about what's kind of trendy right now
Yeah.
versus what was trendy 10 years ago. It's completely the opposite, really. Trusting in yourself when you really are passionate about a piece, then that's where we're going for now.
It's what you guys were saying at the beginning as well, that you just kind of have to accept that you're going to make mistakes either way. So might as well go with your
Yeah.
guts and what you instinctively like. Have you ever disagreed about buying a work?
For sure.
Yeah, and then we didn't buy it.
That's the process. If you don't agree, both of you, then you just don't buy it.
There's one where Nico was like, "Trust me on this one," and I said, "Fine." And I now really like it.
Good. It grew on you.
Yeah, but genuinely, if he's like, "Look at this," and I'm like, "Absolutely not," then the conversation is over.
I think we vetoed things before,
Yeah, we
but
definitely.
we wouldn't have collected to the extent that we do if we didn't mostly agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess it kind of depends on the price point too, right? If you're looking at,
Yeah,
I don't
also
know, 20, 50K will be a different discussion,
Point of view.
for
compared to
sure. Yeah.
5K, 7K maybe.
Exactly, yeah.
How do you navigate that financial aspect actually? Because you said you don't really have a set budget, but you know, renovating an apartment, buying an apartment, like you said, there's some extent you have
Yeah,
to be mindful, I guess, of how much you're spending on art too.
there was a few years where we were spending quite frivolously, and and now we have a 1-year-old in the midst of renovation, and we're much more conservative.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's the practical element too. You move to a new city, you have a new apartment. There's many 4-meter high ceiling walls that you can do fun things with. But I also think this is kind of fine to have years where, there were years where we went to 10 fairs in a year. And, last year we didn't. Or Miko went to maybe 5 or so, but I didn't go. We went to Friesen, London, but that was that. I think that's kind of fine. And I mean, we did notice that, most of our, well, not most, but a lot of our earnings from our company were spent on art for a year. I think that's the kind of the luxury that we afford ourselves.
Let's talk a little bit about your company. What made you want to work together? How did that come about?
When we moved to Portugal, we had our own independent clients. We decided after working for two bigger companies that we both left in 22, we decided that we had our own network of clients, and that also our lines of business were symbiotic in the sense that there are people who collect art who also want to build foundations, and there are philanthropists who also want to collect art. So cultural engineers, that phrasing, as you mentioned, basically encompasses that line of work which caters to those specific audiences, namely art collectors, but also philanthropists, and in Julia's line of work, cultural organizations, foundations, and other nonprofit institutions.
Mm.
So we wanted to create a sort of in my mind, the first of its kind that actually uses our 30 years in the industry combined to actually work with those stakeholders in a way that's reciprocally beneficial for all of them. So it was a practicality that we needed to actually have a vehicle to build our clients that we started Arbulu Studio, but it was also through the desire to do greater good and serve these two audiences in a way that combined our skill sets meaningfully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, couldn't have said it better. I think, and it's worked really well, actually. I think, both my clients appreciate Nico's expertise, when he comes in around the market, around collecting, around kind of navigating the commercial world. And Nico's clients are always happy to have a conversation around patronage, building their own foundation. And so, we've worked also with individuals who are kind of on their journey towards making an impact in the art, both in the non-profit as well as in the commercial world. And we can really advise confidently in that way on both angles.
And I also like being Julia's assistant.
That was
That's-
pre-kid era.
and yeah, we learn a lot from each other.
So you have a range of different clients then.
Yeah, we do. So obviously, with the institutional clients, we have a lot together with Arts Ideas Realized, done the Camden Arts Centre, Gaia Art Foundation, Black Cultural Archives. They're all in London. As arbulu, we've done the Light Art Space in Berlin. But then I think, this is more really on my end, and Nick obviously has Freeze and Christie's and Verse at the time, which is also a whole other area that he's an expert on. But what we've worked on together most, is kind of private foundations that are building institutions and that are building patronage programs. And I think with those foundations none of them are based in Europe, and that's really also fascinating to work from a non-Eurocentric point of view, but actually really look at the art world from a much more global stand.
I think categorically, Julia works more with institutions and I work more with private collectors. So we have these two demographics that we cater to. But like we said, there's tons of overlap and cross-pollination and learnings that come as a result of the work that we do together, which is very gratifying.
And on the collectors' clients specifically, how do you work with them? Like what type of collectors are they? They're first-time collectors, they're more seasoned maybe. What type of questions do they have for you? How do you help them?
I like to work with people for a very long-term basis. So any family that I take on, that I work with on a personal and one-to-one experience, I try and build the collection over a framework of at least 5 years. And the reason that I do that is because as you work together on a personal basis with a family, and a lot of the people that I work with are actually couples or families, you then start to understand their taste better and be able to serve them better. It takes time. I've had conversations with people where we didn't start working professionally together until after 2 years of figuring out what the best structure was. So for the advisory, for the one-to-one advisory, that's really important to me. This form of slow looking longevity, understanding the objectives of the collection, and building those collections with that sort of longer term mindset, and also being sure that I'm able to add value in markets that I actually have a deep understanding of. So, for example, I have a client where we almost exclusively have been collecting female artists of my generation, under 40, European, Chinese, American. And I know these artists because I know the galleries, I know a lot of the artists personally. I have a good knowledge of this market. Another collector is transitioning from working in a more figurative vernacular to adding, after we've established this sort of collection as it exists, she then wants to transition into buying more blue chip abstractionists, more established names as well. So I'm stewarding the collection in that direction as well. So basically those two variables, longevity and being able to provide deep access, education and market expertise, and knowing that I'm able to do that and having that reciprocal confidence with my collector, those are the things that are really important to me as well.
Have you seen an evolution in the way collectors want to work with you over the years?
Yeah, for sure. I think I think right now, if you look at the mid-tier market, there's a lot of galleries that are closing, or at least that's what the media really projects. So Clearing, Bloom, recently Carl Friedman. So if you have this trepidation or this fear in the market, and especially the mid-tier market, let's say $80 to $600,000, give or take, then galleries and more significantly to your question, collectors are more hesitant to buy in that particular segment because they see the dynamic of what's happening in terms of both the overall pricing elasticity, but also the fact that galleries that are marketing those artists are closing. So we've lost a bit of confidence in the mid-market segment. And what that's led to is a power vacuum, and also the poaching of very young artists by the mega galleries. So you have a market segment where there's works that are up to 50K, a lot of very hot names. I like to think about it as heat pockets. And then there's the bigger galleries like Hauser and Wirth, who are then taking on these younger and younger artists because there's a void in between the emerging and the top tier galleries. And
And
you
what does
know,
that mean for collectors?
so for collectors, they're either more confident sub 50K, or they're more confident in buying blue chip names because there's either the upward trajectory of the emerging artists, which I'm able to spot oftentimes, and then there's also the blue chip established market, which has more of a backstop when it comes to the financial pricing because there's more of a secondary market traction and there's more support because the names are more established. So that's basically the dynamic that I've witnessed unfold over the past 3 years, really, where some of these galleries have started to close and collectors are more confident in either end of the spectrum.
Okay. What does that mean for that mid-tier then?
That's a great question. There's a lot of amazing galleries, Harold Street, Tanya Ben-Akhdar, Carlos Ishikawa, Esther Shipper, that have solid mid-market, mid-tier pricing and segment for artists that they have. But I think it's going to become more difficult for artists that operate at those price points to survive at a longer term basis. Because the other thing that's also happening, and on top of what I just mentioned, is that there's definitely a rise of artist agencies. So you see artists like Peter Doig and Katerina Grossa and other artists who, yes, they show with Gagosian, but they also show with artist agents like Andrea Crane or Jonas Ludekins, or people who are actually very close to managing their careers. Or there's agencies that are exclusively devoted to artists like 291, which is agency founded by ex-Gagosian
Mhm.
staffers who I've had really pleasant correspondences with, and I like what they do as well. And these agencies and agents, and also artists who are functioning independent because after they've cleared that 50K price point, they can market themselves more easily. They're saying, why do we need this middle tier gallery to support our career when essentially we can do a lot of this ourselves, make 100% or make a much higher margin, and not necessarily have to deal with the gatekeeping and protectionism that could potentially be provided by a gallery acting in bad faith in that
Yeah.
particular aspect of the market. So it's a very new dynamic, and I'm committed to helping collectors to navigate this new world. I'm seeing all sorts of schismatic fragmentation when it comes to artistic progression. And the way I discuss and teach it is that it's not a ladder, it's a landscape. And you
Mhm.
navigate this landscape as an artist. And artists have asked me, what gallery should I show at in Chelsea? And I say, hey, like, actually, your art can be displayed in different non-gallery contexts. You're already in a corporate collection, you're already in this hotel collection. Do you really need to have a gallery to actually support your career? And and I think now, in the current state of the market, the necessity of having mainstream representation, and also from my conversation, artists asking for representation, all of that's changing a lot. And that coincides with what I was talking about earlier, which is more established galleries closing because they can't pay the bills. But it's also coincides with a new sort of drive of self-marketing and independence that the artist can have, and new forms of branding that can take place. What galleries ultimately offer for these younger artists, to go back to your question of why we show with the gallery, is they have institutional links and credibility. So if you want to show at a museum, it might be easier to work with a mainstream gallery who's actually sold to that museum before, and that's why you would go through the steps of
Well,
showing
and they
different
have an
galleries.
established client list.
And they have an established client list, so they take care of that for you.
Yeah.
So that's that. But then the last point I'll make on this topic is it's not necessarily a matter of dealing with career progression in a way that goes through different vendors. It's also a matter of dealing with career progression in a way where your market doesn't get blown up and destroyed like we've seen with so many artists at auction in 2022. I'm not going to name names, but completely unsustainable prices, which were in many cases based on a stronger Asian market where Chinese buyers would come through and pay exorbitant amounts for very, very young artists. Those Chinese buyers, the situation in China from the macro perspective economically, those buyers haven't come through for the past couple of years. We'll see what happens in the coming years. But as a result, those 2022 peaks for artists really caused a lot of damage because, well, sometimes the mid-tier gallery closed. Sometimes the gallery was forced to up the primary market price to something that was more comparable to what was achieved at auction. Sometimes there was only one or two bidders who were actually going for seven-figure prices for these types of artists. So my advice in a way would be not just to consider the vendors, but also to consider the way in which your market is being protected from an economic perspective, be it a secondary market or otherwise, and use that as an important form of progression when it comes to building your career.
That's really, really interesting way of looking at it. Julia, how do you see it on the institutional side and this changing landscape? How are museums and bigger institutions navigating that?
Well, I mean, from my end, I work with institutions from a fundraising perspective and from a strategic kind of organizational direction that doesn't necessarily go that deep into kind of any kind of program planning. However, obviously, and working with institutions that are based in the UK, there's a huge amount of pressure around fundraising and around funds, especially, actually in the same way, especially kind of medium-sized institutions, small, medium-sized institutions. Obviously, the nationals also have their own pressures, but there's always a much more solid foundation of support around there. And I know if you've seen, but actually the UK, there's going to be a £1 billion injection into the cultural landscape. It was just recently announced. Don't necessarily know yet how that looks like, but there is finally a recognition that so many cultural institutions are struggling and artistic institutions are struggling that there's a chance of mass closure in the coming years. And so thankfully that is being recognized and hopefully ameliorated in some capacity. But obviously that in prices, insurance values, influence what you're showing in some capacity or not, even though, if you don't want to really acknowledge that. But also if you have a bigger gallery that can help support you in putting that show on, it's much more helpful than, having an artist whose gallery is perhaps not able to do that. So there are these pressures that are real, and that there's a tendency then to favor a bit more market-friendly artists to show. And, that's not across the landscape, because obviously there's a lot of institutions that are very committed to showing underrepresented voices. But yeah, the market definitely influences the institutional landscape much more so than perhaps 30 years ago, where it was the other way around.
Very interesting. I could go on this topic for much longer. So, keeping that lens of industry perspective, what do you think most collectors misunderstand about how the art world works?
I think very often this idea that art is somehow a liquid form of investment. When you're new to collecting, I do think that people, because you're so, that news cycle of auction records, of this, of that, I think there's a tendency to believe, to insist on, well, is this a good investment? And is this a good investment? Can I sell that in 3 years? You might know in 10 years and 20 years, and perhaps, it's a good investment because it'll be in your house for the rest of your life. So, I think that sentiment of like making that mistake is still, at least seeing friends who buying things for the first time or so. And I think also for Nico, no, I think there was a push around how much do you talk about art as an investment when you talk about collecting. And then I think, what other mistake? I think I just wouldn't go with the market. I really would go with your instinct and with what you really, really love. Because
I would go with market sometimes.
It's just the market can change, very quickly. It's not the market today is very different to the market in 5 years.
I think what people really don't understand at the beginning stages of collecting are the reputational markers of the vendor stakeholders who are in the equation. People don't, I'm not going to name gallery names, but there are very different high street shopping mall galleries versus galleries on Savile Row. There are very different young East London galleries than Mayfair galleries. And if you don't necessarily understand the reputation of these galleries because you don't know their past, their founder, when they were basically created, the trajectory of the other artists in their roster, what sort of conceptual or philosophical slant their artists fill, whether or not they're more focused on paintings, what type of painting. If you don't understand the overall spectrum and image and have a full picture of what that gallery or auction house is known for, and you end up buying without this holistic knowledge, you can end up getting something that you might not be happy with. And this is me using the market logic and reason versus the buy what you love reason, which we do anyway. But I
agree. There's a difference around buy what you love when you have seen art for 30 years versus buy what you love when you walk through. I don't know. You walk down the street and see a pretty picture. In a shopping window.
I appreciate you making that distinction. I think that's actually really important.
Yeah.
Like buying what you love when you know what you're doing and you understand the market around it, the context around it is very different.
Yeah.
So understanding your own intentionality as a buyer is very important. And a lot of people, like what Julia said, there are people who don't fully understand the liquidity constraints that are involved in purchasing works at a certain price point from certain people. And if you don't necessarily understand what you're getting into, even if you're buying it because you love it, sometimes those people come to me and say, hey, like, I want to sell this work. This is 10 plus years later. And I'm like, well, you bought something. Why did you buy this? And this work is now worth nothing because you didn't know or understand the variables that I teach and what I just discussed previously about stakeholder reputation and who the actual vendor is and what they do with the rest of their program. So having that due diligence and a lot of people don't care. They just want whatever it is. And then they end up being unhappy. They buy what they love, but they end up being turned sour pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I end up having to pick up the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to prevent people from making those mistakes. And that's really important for my practice.
So would you say then, if I'm a new collector, I have a little bit of money saved, would you say that I should use some of that money maybe towards education before buying anything?
I think what it is really enmesh yourself in the gallery scene, and I think that is
that too, and auction scene.
Not necessarily. I would think if you start off, you want to be with, you want to go to the East London galleries, you want to go to the, Lower East Side galleries, you want to go to galleries that have a strong program. You want to understand the art, you want to understand what they're showing, why they're showing, you want to ask questions. And then, we want to look at the CV of an artist. You want to go to museum shows. you want to see what's going on in that in the world, and then there can be a piece where you believe in the gallery, where you find the artists interesting. You want to make sure that you don't just like one work in the show, but that you like all of the works in the show, and you take one of them.
Or you like most of the works.
Most of the
works that the artist does more broadly.
Yeah. So it's not
that you understand their trajectory.
Yeah. And I think that's the way to go. And I don't think I wouldn't go close to auctions yet. I would just
why not?
Why not? Yeah.
Because I think with auctions you have to have a much more deeper level of understanding the market and of understanding that artist's career. And with auctions, you do tend to, you buy stuff that's proven, or, if there is, obviously you say, this is the one artist I want to have, and they're available at auctions, and it's somehow come the price is okay, or the price is currently low, and that can there have been some day auctions the last 2 years where you could have picked up a really good artist for quite cheap at the moment. So yes, I maybe take that back, but I think that
I disagree.
I find that it's a deeper level of engagement with the market, and it is a nice thing to start with the primary market, because there's, you talk to the artist there.
Yeah.
The gallery, in my world, I find still very much the gallery is a custodian of the artist's career. You do work with them.
I think what I think is really important is context. If you're really interested in, first of all, I think as our conversation is illustrated, art by and large is not a financially sound investment for the most part. But I think you can buy at auction early on, but it's really important that whether or not you buy at auction, if you're interested in the financial mechanics of a certain artist, and teach about this, I talk about this, it's very important. You can do comparison shopping by looking at aggregators like Barnaby's or the Sales Room or Invaluable, whatever. Like if you do the research by looking at the artist's career, you can see what comparable works are sold for at auction. Yeah. And it's interesting.
It's true, but again, this is all very like price focused.
Well, it depends how interested are you. Are you really interested in understanding pricing mechanisms for the artist, or is this a purchase where you could be more accepting of it not necessarily having any financial value, which most purchases are. But if you're more interested in the economics, it does make sense, I think, to look at some of the sort of analysis and price indications that come. And that doesn't necessarily mean bidding at auction, but you can look at a database like ArtPrice and say, hey, you can look at a comparable work indicator from any artist, and you can see this is what it's sold for in the past.
You need to understand what's a good provenance. You need to understand like where that artist is showing, which other galleries that artist is showing, what's the primary price compared to their auction price right now. If you're buying contemporary, obviously. And I do think, if you're buying modern or even, earlier artists, their auction is definitely a place to start looking. But I think with contemporary, there's a lot of layers that you need to understand of where that price comes from and what that means in comparison to, the rest of the market.
I agree.
Okay. So yeah, I'm definitely not going to start spending money right away then. But
you're already collecting. You mentioned you already have a few things that have you bought works at auction?
I wasn't looking for myself. I mean,
okay.
like in the shoes of a new collector. It's but that I find that is and this is something I've experienced personally too. I find it overwhelming. There's so much art out there, and yes, you should definitely. You mentioned, Julia, go to museums, go to shows, educate yourself, like you said, Nico. But at the end of the day, there's still so many options. There's still so much out there. Even if you buy what you like, with all this knowledge, there's also an element of FOMO. So I don't know, at least for someone like me, I think it's helpful to have some sort of framework and guardrails to decide where to spend time and money, because it can also very quickly turn into a full-time job, right? There's people who do this full-time. So I think back to this person who's just getting started with their 5K saved, what if there was just one piece of advice that you would give them? Like they're prepared to buy fairly quickly. What would that be?
Look at the work, understand, like, be happy with the gallery, understand that, see what other artists have done in that gallery. If there's other artists beyond your artist that, you can buy for under 5K that have had a career where they're selling at higher prices. So not only prices, but just that have had some sort of institutional support, any kind of, what are the careers of the other artists in that gallery?
Mm-hmm. What if it's not
What's
from a
the
gallery?
Well, I'm assuming it's in my gallery.
You get to definitely recommend buying from a
Going to a
gallery.
gallery.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would probably do that too.
I think if it's your first 5K, I mean, look, if it's like, if you've always wanted a Picasso drawing or like something like this, and then
You're not getting a Picasso drawing.
I know, but like something like, I don't know, some sort of artist that then shows up at an auction and you're like, this is what I've always wanted, then please go for that as your first, But if it is something you're not kind of set on, I would say check it around the career of the other artists in the gallery, see what stage, how, like, the education of the artist, I think, is still very, I know there's many like autodidacts, but I think it is still, there is a level of confidence around what this person has done and where they have studied. And, with under 5K, presumably that was not that long ago. Want to maybe make sure that that's not that long ago, that hasn't that price hasn't been like this for 20 years. But it's
really,
true,
that's interesting,
right? No, like I would say that, and
I would say so. Again, like when I see all these,
it's hard to do one advice, Antonia.
I know.
when I see all of these, like, going back to what really grinds my gears before is these non-practical pull quotes of like, buy what you love and be curious and keep training your eye by going to fairs and buy lots of books. I'm like, wow, that's really not practical. But then at the same time, I want, if I give like one piece of advice on this, I wanted to make it sound professional and well considered. My advice would be, if I talked before about understanding the context of the gallery. So let's continue on that thought. You have $5,000. Understand the context of what motivates you to buy. Understand your context, be it financial, be it decorative, be it stylistic, be it conceptual. Are you looking to buy painting? Why are you buying painting? Are you looking to buy painting to fill a space behind your couch, or because you've been following the artist? Analyze your motivations and the contextual procedures that you use to make a decision, and think about those. Reverse engineer this. I like this work. I can see it here because I've always wanted to buy a blue Fauves style landscape with thick impasto. And I've always wanted this. And I've wanted this because I studied this in grade 10 world cultures, and because I saw this Kies van Dongen in the Stedelijk, and these are the reasons why this purchase makes sense. If you continually ask why, you end up finding more background information that motivates the acquisition and will then give you a more sturdy, supportive foundation to justify the financial decision, which can be a costly one, especially if that's what you've saved for a long time. So the more you understand your motivations and context, the better prepared you'll be to make that purchase.
I like that. Let's go to that.
What you're saying, essentially, work on your intentions, like be intentional about what you buy. Don't be willy.
Understand your intentionality.
Yeah. Okay.
And question your intention.
Don't do it on vibes alone. That's why you
Exactly. Okay, I love that. That's really good advice. Do you think collectors have a responsibility to their time? You know how you would say that institutions do, I would argue. Do you think the same of collectors?
It's funny because, as I said, like I grew up in a house with a collection that was definitely of a pastime. And in that, I do think there's something, that kind of collector's gene is there's something even almost more endearing for something that is not that kind of wildly collected, that you are actually a custodian of a collection.
Yeah.
So I would probably say, no, you're not. It's not a responsibility to collect of your time, but I think it's you become a custodian of a certain era or of a certain by stewarding a collection in that way. And actually, I really admire people who're going for like a completely non-traditional spectrum of collecting and then really go in depth in there. For example, that Japanese woodblock prints that is not far, it's not our time, but it's there's a lot of references that you can still make to art making today. But I do think, on the other hand, it's very meaningful to collect in your time because you get to meet the artists, you get to, support a living career, which from my end feels more meaningful than collecting of a pastime. Yet I wouldn't say it's immediately a responsibility, because I think there's responsibility to be had for other collecting eras, or just because those are worldviews that are still informing the way we think today.
Yeah, 100%. And you mentioned stewardship. I think that is a form of responsibility to the collection itself, to the works, to the artists, but it doesn't have to necessarily be to the contemporary days, like the time now. Okay.
But it is the most fun, I think, for us, and the most meaningful, because it is responding to the world we're living in right now, and it is, we know a lot of artists that we have at home, so that also makes it more meaningful.
I also respect people who collect things that are very obscure and not of our time at all.
Yeah.
Like weird Kunsthammer.
I mean, and your mom is an expert in
stuff.
early photography. You have a lot of early photography at home.
So we donated a lot of photography that we had. My family did. But I also like, there are collector genes. I worked with the son of Patrizia Sandretta Rodengo for many years. Patrizia has an incredible collection, but she also collects like weird costume jewelry. And she has that too, and not many people know that about her, but she has that. She has like it's a whole other thing that she dives into.
Cool, guys. I've got just a few more quick fire. What's the last artwork you purchased?
We purchased a work by Mark Prats Quintana from his current exhibition at Painters Painting, sorry, PPP. And I also, full disclosure, I also helped to run their Substack. So I write for them, and I love what these guys do. And this artist, I think, is early stage and really memorable. So that was the last thing.
So that was 2 weeks ago? Yes, last week?
That was last week.
Wow. Okay. Super recent then. How would you describe your collection in one word?
Spirited. We talked about this.
So
yeah, because there's a lot of spiritual elements. Yeah, my word is spirited. You can just
no, I like that.
Yeah,
let's roll with that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. Yeah.
No, sorry, you're saying, but why spirited?
Why spirited? Because I think all of them have some sort of aura to them, and they are. I think that it's quite varied, but there is an element of that in it. I mean, what did you say?
I love it. Spirited. Also, when I hear the word, I think about Japanese prints as well, and the spirituality of the clouds and the movement and ukiyo-e.
And it's nice.
And all
we
of that.
should say that,
all
but
makes sense.
They're all like the woodblock prints and the contemporary works all next to each other. So it's a nice dialogue between them.
You have to send me some pictures, because I would love to see how these works talk to each other. I mean, it's obviously different in person, but I'm super intrigued. It sounds really, really, really cool. Who's one artist you're excited about, but you haven't acquired anything of theirs yet? If you can choose one.
A mega FOMO recently, well, relatively recently, was Oliver Bach, which
Okay.
we saw his first show in Lisbon in just as we moved to 2022, I want to say. And we had to work on hold, but weren't fast enough. And his career has since exploded. And we know him and we're big fans of his work, but have never kind of just kind of missed out on it.
I also want to give a special shout out to Florentina Holsinger, who Julia recently interviewed as well. It just got picked up by Today's Ropac last week.
I didn't interview her. We had an event with her, and she's
In
representing
conversation.
She's representing the Austrian pavilion.
Representing Austria at the Venice Biennale. Just got picked up. Amazing artist. I'm so excited for what she's about to bring to the Biennale. Yeah. It's going to be absolutely crazy. And it's really great that a gallery like his takes a risk on a performance artist who does these really outlandish things and is totally non-commercial. And I'm really excited for her career and what she's about to do.
I look forward to seeing that. Awesome. Mm-hmm. Cool. And who's a collector you look up to?
I have so many. It was really hard to. It's I don't know. I'll give you two. Herb and Dorothy Vogel, I think, is just such an incredible story. What they were able to amass, how they did it, how they lived frugally, but also collected such incredible artists. And then the total opposite end of the spectrum is Booty Tech, who died in 2022, but was obsessed with creating a collection that had these mega installations, and then was able to form a lot of different institutional links, creating the Hughes Museum, but also to have the works be shown at different museums and institutions after he died as well. So I think he was someone who was incredibly daring with collecting very non-commercial, large-scale installations. And also I admire the way in which he preserved his legacy through the institutional ties that he established. So those are my two.
And for me, I think it has to be Agnes Gund, just because of her phenomenal philanthropy. You know, I think she really took on her collecting journey into actually then, supporting institutions across New York and the States and globally even, and running her own charity. So she's been, I think there's so much, if you are fortunate enough that, whatever you collect does, manifold in value, I think it's really beautiful to then give back to the cultural industry.
I agree.
I agree. Fantastic. It's a great close to this interview. Thank you guys. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, us too. It was actually the first time we're really talking about.
I could go on, but we're gonna stop here. Maybe we'll do episode 2.
Maybe we'll do a sequel next year.
Why not?
We can go into in depth what we have. Yeah, great, Antonia. So wonderful. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's it for today's episode of the Collector's Corner. If you enjoyed it, do follow the show and leave a short rating or review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It really helps more people find these conversations. And if you've got thoughts, feedback, or someone you think I should talk to next, I'd love to hear from you. Just drop me a message on Instagram or through the website, thecollectorscornerpodcast.com. Thank you for listening and for being part of this growing community. Until next time.